I do most of the stunts myself that I have time for. We had a sword fight in the first one that I got caught along the side of the arm. It's not that big, but it was about 3 or 4 inches longer.
If you grew up anywhere near a television set in 1990s, there's a good chance you spent at least one afternoon watching a guy in a leather vest punch a minotaur. Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, wasn't prestige television. It wasn't trying to be. It was cheap, cheerful, occasionally ridiculous, and somehow one of the most influential shows of its decade. Behind the rubber monsters and the wisecracking gods, though, there's a surprisingly wild true story. One involving hidden strokes, a dead movie star's near miss, a future Oscar nominee in foam muscles, and an entire national film industry that arguably wouldn't exist without it. Here are 20 facts about Hercules that most fans never learned. By 1997, Kevin Sorbo had spent 3 seasons hurling stuntmen through balsa wood columns and doing most of his own fight choreography. He was 38, in peak shape, and at the height of his fame. Then his left arm started acting strange, tingling, aching, going cold for no reason. Doctors looked at it more than once and waved it off as nothing serious. Sorbo, understandably, didn't push the issue. He was playing the strongest man alive. It was easy to assume his body simply worked. Then came the day everything changed. After a visit to a chiropractor, his vision blurred so badly on the drive home that he could barely keep the car on the road. At the hospital, doctors found an aneurysm in an artery near his shoulder that had been quietly throwing off blood clots for months. Surgery to repair it revealed something even more alarming. Sorbo had already suffered 3 separate strokes without knowing it. He kept the whole ordeal private for more than a decade, later admitting in interviews that pride and fear were a big part of why. In his memoir, True Strength, he described the disorienting reality of going from a guy who could bench press anything to someone who needed to hold onto furniture just to shuffle to the bathroom. None of it showed up in the tabloids at the time. The show simply kept airing, and nobody watching at home had any idea. With their leading man suddenly unable to carry a full workload, the Hercules writers had a genuine production emergency on their hands. Stunt doubles picked up the slack, guest stars filled in, and Sorbo's screen time in some episodes shrank to almost nothing. Rather than quietly patch over the gap, the writing team, including Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who would go on to shape major Hollywood franchises, leaned all the way into it. The result was an episode set in the present day, where the cast played fictionalized versions of the actual people who made the show. Bruce Campbell played a version of producer Rob Tappert. Other cast and crew members played themselves more or less. The plot follows the production office panicking after an earthquake causes their star, Kevin Sorbo, to vanish. When he resurfaces, the twist is that this modern-day Kevin Sorbo actually is Hercules, living quietly as a mortal while playing a fictionalized version of his own life on television. It's a strange little loop that barely makes sense if you think about it too hard, and it only exists because a medical emergency forced the writers to get creative. Instead of hiding the problem, they turned it into one of the most inventive episodes of the entire series. The actor who played Ares, the god of war, wasn't chasing a life on camera. New Zealand-born Kevin Smith grew up dreaming about professional rugby, and that was the plan right up until a concussion sidelined him from the sport. While he was recovering at home, his wife spotted a casting notice for a stage musical about Elvis Presley and encouraged him to audition. He got the part, and that single detour rerouted the rest of his life. Smith first showed up in the Hercules universe playing Iphicles, Hercules' fully mortal half-brother, not the villain he'd eventually become famous for. Producers saw something magnetic in him and brought him back as Ares, and that role is what made him a household name among fans of the franchise. For a stretch around 1998 and 1999, Smith was simultaneously playing the same character, the God of War, across 3 different television series shot in the same universe: Hercules, Xena, Warrior Princess, and Young Hercules. Convention crowds treated him like a star, and his career was clearly building towards something bigger in film. In early 2002, Smith had just wrapped filming on the martial arts sequel Warriors of Virtue 2 in China, excited about the chance to train alongside a stunt performer from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. On February 6th, the day after filming ended, he fell from a prop tower on set while waiting for a ride back to his hotel. The fall caused severe head trauma, and he was placed on life support. His wife and parents flew to Beijing to be with him. He never regained consciousness, and he died on February 15, 2002, at age 38. He left behind his wife and 3 young sons. What makes the loss sting even harder for fans is what was supposed to come next. That same March, Smith was scheduled to begin filming in Hawaii for the action thriller Tears of the Sun, opposite Bruce Willis, what would have been his first major Hollywood role, and the kind of break performers wait a whole career for. His memorial service in Auckland drew castmates who remembered a warm, funny presence both on and off camera. He never got the chance most people assumed was coming. Xena wasn't built to be a franchise. She was written as a disposable villain for a short arc in the first season of Hercules, originally meant to die by the end of her final appearance. The role was first cast with a different actress, who fell ill and couldn't make it to New Zealand in time to start filming. The production then scrambled through several more names. One actress accepted the part, and then had her manager call back within the hour to pull her out, and multiple others turned it down entirely. With the clock running out, producers were reluctant to cast Lucy Lawless, who had just appeared in the previous episode as an entirely different character, out of concern that audiences would be confused seeing her again so soon. Lawless has joked since that the list of actresses considered ahead of her was long, and every single one said no before the role came to her. She ended up landing one of the most iconic action roles of the decade, largely because everyone ahead of her in line walked away. When Xena, Warrior Princess, premiered alongside Hercules Season 2 in the fall of 1995, it was expected to live comfortably in its parent show's shadow. That lasted only a matter of weeks. Xena's ratings and cultural footprint quickly overtook the original show, and the spin-off eventually aired in well over 100 countries, later earning recognition as one of the defining cult series of the era. Reports at the time suggested Kevin Sorbo wasn't entirely thrilled watching a character introduced as a guest villain eclipse the show built around him. Lawless downplayed any rivalry publicly, describing the cast as one big family with nothing to compete over. Whether that framing held up behind the scenes is harder to say. In the years since both shows ended, the public relationship between Lawless and Sorbo has visibly soured, particularly around political disagreements aired on social media, which suggests the on-set harmony she described publicly wasn't the whole story. Michael Hurst, who played Hercules' best friend and sidekick Iolaus, turned out to be one of the most versatile performers in the entire franchise. Across Hercules, Xena, and Young Hercules, he took on more than a dozen distinct roles over the run of the shows, everything from a heavily disguised underworld ferryman to an alternate universe double of his own main character. His most memorable detour was a flamboyant British pantomime dame, character the producers discovered after watching him perform in a local Auckland stage production. Since Hurst was actually born in Lancashire, England, he could deliver the accent with real authenticity, something sharp-eared British viewers picked up on immediately. When those episodes aired, he wasn't credited under his own name for the role. The credits listed a completely invented alias instead. In one particularly chaotic episode, he was credited under 2 different fake names for 2 different characters he played in the same hour. Few actors on the show matched his range, and even fewer got the chance to disappear into that many parts. When Fox Kids greenlit the prequel series, Young Hercules, in 1998, producers needed a new lead after the original Young Hercules actor declined to relocate to New Zealand for a full season. The role went to an unknown 17-year-old Canadian actor named Ryan Gosling. His costume and makeup were designed to make him look bulkier and more heroic than his actual teenage frame allowed, and he trained in martial arts with the same coaches used elsewhere in the franchise to sell the physicality. Gosling moved to Auckland and filmed all 50 episodes of the show's single season before it wrapped without renewal. He said in later interviews that the experience nudged him toward wanting more substantial, character-driven work rather than continuing down the action hero path, a preference that shows in the very different career he built afterward. It's genuinely strange to think that the actor who would later headline La La Land, Blade Runner 2049, and Barbie spent his late teens wearing fake arm padding and fighting rubber monsters on the other side of the world. Beyond Gosling, the Hercules and Xena universe functioned as an unofficial finishing school for New Zealand talent who went on to much bigger things. Carl Urban appeared as Cupid on Hercules and Julius Caesar on Xena, before later playing Ymir in The Lord of the Rings, Dr. McCoy in the rebooted Star Trek films, and Billy Butcher in The Boys. Rose McIver, now known for headlining Ghosts on CBS, appeared on Hercules as a child performer. Bruce Campbell recurred across the franchise as the roguish thief Autolycus and also directed episodes behind the camera. Gina Torres, later famous as Jessica Pearson on Suits, played a warrior queen in the same universe. Looking back at the combined cast list now reads like a genuine who's who of people who went on to shape the following 2 decades of film and television. Executive producer Sam Raimi, already a cult favorite for the Evil Dead trilogy, ran 3 interlocking fantasy action shows out of New Zealand simultaneously through his production company, co-founded with Robert Tappert and Bruce Campbell. Overseeing Hercules, Xena, and Young Hercules at once on a syndicated television budget gave Raimi an unusually intensive, hands-on education in visual effects and efficient action filmmaking, the kind of experience few directors get before landing a major studio franchise. When Sony brought him on to direct Spider-Man in the early 2000s, Raimi carried a lot of that visual instinct and pacing with him. Bruce Campbell's now famous cameo appearances across the Spider-Man trilogy trace directly back to their years of collaboration on Hercules. Meanwhile, Tappert, who produced alongside Raimi the whole time, married Lucy Lawless in 1998 while both shows were still airing, a reminder that this franchise was in a lot of ways a tight-knit family operation dressed up as a television empire. Kevin Sorbo met actress Sam Jenkins on set during a Season 3 episode that required their characters to kiss in their very first scene together. Sorbo later admitted that having an instant, scripted spark made asking her out afterward much less nerve-wracking. Jenkins, who had studied biomedical engineering at Duke University before working as a model in Paris, brought a sharper, more analytical energy to their conversations than he expected, and the two hit it off quickly. He proposed within months, and they married in January 1998. What makes the timeline remarkable is that this entire courtship overlapped with Sorbo secretly recovering from the strokes he was hiding from the public. Jenkins didn't back away from the relationship during that difficult stretch. She stepped back from her own acting career to help him relearn basic physical tasks, and she later contributed material to his memoir describing him, in her words, as her hero. It's a very different picture than the glossy on-screen romance audiences saw at the time. The creative team behind the show made a deliberate choice early on to avoid the classical, marble statue version of Hercules that most people picture. Series creator Christian Williams studied existing portrayals of the character across myth and film and consciously rejected all of them. Instead, the writers built their version around the persona of an approachable, all-American athlete, reportedly modeled loosely on the easygoing likability of a star NFL quarterback rather than a chiseled demigod. Sam Raimi has said in past interviews that the goal was never a god staring down from Olympus, but a regular guy who happened to have superhuman strength. That choice shaped nearly everything about the show's tone. Apollo rode around on a golden snowboard and talked like a Southern California teenager. Dialogue leaned heavily on contemporary slang rather than anything resembling ancient Greek speech. White togas were largely avoided altogether. The whole show was built to feel like a 90s buddy comedy that happened to be set among gods and monsters, and that specific, slightly goofy tone is a big part of why it still holds up as fun rather than dated. That meta episode born from Sorbo's health crisis wasn't a one-off experiment. In the show's own internal mythology, it suggested that Hercules survived into the modern era, became a god, and chose to live quietly among mortals under the identity of an actor named Kevin Sorbo, even going so far as to work on a TV show loosely based on his own life to make sure it reflected the era accurately. It's a strange little hall of mirrors, a fictional character playing an actor playing that same character, performed by a real actor also named Kevin Sorbo. A later meta-style episode pushed the joke even further, with a mystery unfolding at a corporate retreat while Kevin Sorbo secretly uses divine strength to protect people around him. When another character connects the dots and points out that if Ares is real, Hercules must be too, the room turns to stare at him, and he brushes it off with a laugh and a knowing look at the camera. Very little television from that era was willing to be this self-aware, and the entire bit exists because the show had to find a creative way around its lead actor's hidden medical situation. Rather than choreographing the kind of slow, heavy sword-and-shield combat you'd expect from a series set in ancient Greece, the production built every fight sequence around a specific, comparatively rare Chinese martial arts discipline called White Lotus Kung Fu. Martial arts instructor Douglas L. Wong spent roughly 6 weeks training Kevin Sorbo intensively before filming began, teaching him the fast, fluid, acrobatic movement style the producers wanted for the screen. The choice was unusual for American television at the time. Hercules ended up being one of the earliest Western TV productions to lean heavily on wire-assisted stunt work, years before that style became widely recognized through films like The Matrix. Sorbo performed a substantial share of his own stunts and fight choreography through the first several seasons, which makes it all the more unsettling in hindsight that he was quietly enduring the effects of undiagnosed strokes during that exact same physically demanding stretch of filming. Years before computer-generated creatures became a routine part of network television, Hercules was already experimenting heavily with the technology on a weekly syndicated budget. The show used fully CGI monsters for large-scale creatures that would have been nearly impossible to pull off with practical puppets or prosthetics, including multi-headed beasts drawn straight from Greek myth. In the mid-1990s, this kind of effects work was still mostly reserved for feature films with far bigger budgets, and the New Zealand effects team behind the show developed workable techniques on a fraction of that spending. By today's standards, those early creatures look rough and dated. But for audiences watching syndicated television in 1995, nothing else on the air looked quite like it. That willingness to experiment cheaply and often lay down technical groundwork that the local visual effects industry would lean on again for far larger productions not long after. Before Peter Jackson ever scouted a location for The Lord of the Rings in the late 1990s, Hercules and Xena had already spent years quietly training an entire generation of New Zealand film professionals, camera operators, stunt coordinators, effects technicians, and production staff who cut their teeth on the two shows' relentless filming schedules. Crew members who started their careers there went on to work on major international productions in the years that followed, and several Auckland-based effects and production companies that trace their roots back to the Hercules era are still active today. By the time Jackson began assembling the team to build Middle-earth, a large portion of the technical crew were Hercules and Xena veterans who already knew how to move fast and improvise on tight budgets in the New Zealand countryside. The country's film industry has since grown into a business worth billions of dollars annually, and much of that growth traces back, at least in part, to the unglamorous, sword-and-sandals groundwork this show quietly laid down years earlier. The production ran on a philosophy that was genuinely unusual for syndicated fantasy television at the time. During script readings, writers were open to changes suggested by the actors themselves, and cast members were actively encouraged to ad-lib dialogue and physical bits during filming rather than sticking rigidly to the page. That loose, improvisational approach is a big part of why so many episodes have a spontaneous, slightly chaotic energy that set them apart from more tightly scripted fantasy shows airing around the same time. Michael Hurst took particular advantage of that freedom, at times pushing entire episodes into surreal territory. One episode he both starred in and directed reimagined a typical hour of the show as an homage to a ballroom dancing film, replacing the usual fight choreography with an extended competitive dance sequence that reportedly took longer to film than any combat scene in the show's history. Producers let it happen rather than reining it in, understanding that the show's personality came directly from that willingness to get weird. Before a single frame was shot, producer Eric Gruenman spent months hunting for the right location, and New Zealand wasn't originally high on the list. The production needed a southern hemisphere setting to take advantage of longer daylight hours for outdoor filming, and after ruling out several North American locations that couldn't deliver the right fantasy landscapes, the search narrowed to South Africa and Australia as the frontrunners. New Zealand only entered the picture after Gruenman ran into a colleague who's already filming there and suggested he take a look before committing elsewhere. Once he did, he found an enormous range of usable terrain, dense forest, volcanic landscape, coastline, all within a few hours of Auckland and at a fraction of the cost of the other options under consideration. That essentially accidental detour is the reason the entire franchise and the industry boom that followed it ended up rooted in New Zealand instead of somewhere else entirely. Before Anthony Quinn ever stepped into the role, producers reportedly went first to Charlton Heston, an actor synonymous with larger-than-life biblical and historical epics, to play the king of the gods. Heston passed on the part. Producers then approached Anthony Quinn, a two-time Academy Award winner best known for Sorbo the Greek, who accepted. The choice ended up shaping the show in a way Heston likely wouldn't have. Quinn brought a warmth and vulnerability to Zeus that made his scenes with Sorbo feel unexpectedly human, portraying a father figure who was flawed and emotionally complicated rather than purely commanding. Where Heston might have leaned into pure spectacle, Quinn gave the role genuine tenderness, and that dynamic became one of the more affecting threads running through the series. The entire franchise didn't start as a weekly series at all. It began as a set of standalone TV movies produced for a syndicated action movie block in the early 1990s. According to accounts from people involved in the production, The title role was first offered to Dolph Lundgren, the Swedish action star best known for playing Ivan Drago in Rocky IV. Lundgren turned the part down. That single decision arguably reshaped everything that followed. The producers didn't actually want a towering, intimidating bodybuilder type for the role. They wanted someone audiences would find relatable and easy to root for. When Kevin Sorbo auditioned, he wasn't the most physically imposing person in the room, but one of the producers has described seeing exactly the kind of easygoing, likable everyman quality they were looking for. Had Lundgren accepted instead, there's a real chance the franchise never becomes the sprawling, spin-off generating, star-launching phenomenon it turned into. No Xena, no young Hercules, no teenage Ryan Gosling, no accidental training ground for half the Lord of the Rings crew. All of it may trace back to one action star simply saying no. Which of these facts genuinely surprised you, and which one are you still thinking about? Let me know down in the comments.